Frank Beard's final performance with ZZ Top has become a deeply emotional moment for fans who spent more than 5 decades watching his steady rhythm hold one of rock's most recognizable bands together. For years, Beard was the quiet force behind the kit, the drummer whose timing gave Billy Gibbons and Dusty Hill the foundation they needed to create the unmistakable sound of ZZ Top. And now the image of him taking his place behind those drums, for what is described in the reference as his final August 2026 tour date, carries a meaning that goes far beyond an ordinary concert. It feels like the closing of a chapter that many fans never imagined would end. There was a time when ZZ Top seemed almost immune to change. Decade after decade, the same familiar figures stood together on stages around the world, creating the impression that the little all band from Texas could simply keep going forever. But music history eventually catches up with every legendary lineup, and Frank Beard's departure represents something far more significant than one musician stepping away from a stage. It represents the disappearance of one of the central pieces of the rhythm that defined ZZ Top for generations. Beard was never the most visually obvious member of the group. Billy Gibbons and Dusty Hill became famous for their long beards, dark sunglasses, and instantly recognizable stage presence, while Frank Beard ironically remained the only member without a beard. Yet behind the visual identity of ZZ Top was something much more important, and that was the rhythm. Beard's drumming gave the band its heartbeat. His disciplined timing created the space that allowed Gibbons' guitar to move, bend, growl, and settle into the blues rock grooves that made ZZ Top unique. For more than 50 years, his role was not simply to keep time. He helped define the time itself. That is why the final performance described in the reference carries such emotional weight. The closing moments of a concert can already feel powerful, but when fans believe they are watching a legendary musician perform for the final time, every beat suddenly seems different. Every cymbal crash feels heavier. Every transition feels more significant. Every moment behind the drum kit becomes something people want to remember. And as the final part of the performance approached, the atmosphere reportedly shifted from the energy of another ZZ Top show toward something much more reflective. Fans were not simply hearing a band play another set. They were watching a musician whose career had become inseparable from the identity of the group reach what may be the end of his time on that stage. That realization changes the way people experience music. A song that once felt like another part of a familiar setlist can suddenly sound like a farewell. A rhythm that fans have heard countless times can suddenly become a memory being created in real time. And when the final cymbals fade, the silence afterward can sometimes say more than the music itself. Frank Beard's importance to ZZ Top becomes even clearer when you look at how unusual the band's longevity has been. Rock groups often experience constant changes in membership, creative conflicts, personal differences, or shifting musical directions. ZZ Top, however, became famous for its remarkably stable identity. Billy Gibbons, Dusty Hill, and Frank Beard developed a chemistry that lasted for decades, and that chemistry became part of the mythology surrounding the band. They were not simply three musicians working together. To generations of fans, they were ZZ Top. That is why the loss of one original member creates a question that goes far beyond who will sit behind the drums. The question is whether the same musical identity can truly continue when one of the people who helped build it is no longer there. The challenge is especially complicated for Billy Gibbons. The reference describes Beard's departure as leaving Gibbons without either of his original brothers-in-arms, creating a permanent change in the emotional and musical structure of the band. Dusty Hill's absence had already transformed ZZ Top's original lineup, and Frank Beard's departure now represents another fundamental shift. For someone who spent more than half a century sharing stages, studios, tour, and countless musical moments with the same people, the transition cannot simply be measured by whether another drummer can reproduce the beats. The technical part may be possible. The emotional part is something else entirely. A new musician can learn the songs. A great drummer can reproduce the grooves. A talented performer can stand behind the same double bass drums and play the same arrangements. But nobody can recreate the exact history that existed between Beard, Gibbons, and Hill. Nobody can reproduce the feeling of three musicians who spent decades learning how to anticipate one another without saying a word. That kind of chemistry is built slowly, through thousands of rehearsals, concerts, mistakes, improvisations, and shared experiences. It becomes instinctive, and once one part of that relationship changes, the music may still be powerful, but it can never be exactly the same. That is where the future of ZZ Top becomes so fascinating. The reference points toward a new era for the band, with Elwood Francis playing an evolving role and potentially helping bridge the gap between the group's historic past and its next chapter. Francis has already become associated with the band's continuation, and his presence raises an important question. Can ZZ Top preserve its identity while allowing its sound to evolve? The answer may not be about replacing Frank Beard at all. Perhaps the future is about accepting that he cannot be replaced. Instead of trying to recreate the past perfectly, the band may have to carry that past forward while creating something new. That could mean subtle changes in the rhythm section, new energy on stage, different arrangements, or simply a different emotional atmosphere when the band performs the songs that Beard helped make famous. For longtime fans, those changes may be difficult at first. There is something comforting about seeing the musicians who created the music standing in the same familiar places. When that image changes, it can feel as though a piece of personal history has changed too. Many fans discovered ZZ Top through their parents. Others heard the band during their teenage years and carried those songs into adulthood. Some watched the group perform in the 1970s, while others encountered them decades later through recordings, television, or massive live shows. Through all those generations, Frank Beard remained a constant presence behind the kit. His drumming became part of the soundtrack to people's lives without most listeners ever realizing how much they depended on that consistency. That is the strange power of a great drummer. The audience may not always focus on the person creating the rhythm, but the entire performance depends on it. When the timing is perfect, everything feels natural. The guitar sounds stronger, the bass feels deeper, the vocals sit comfortably inside the groove. The crowd moves without thinking about why. Frank Beard had that ability. He provided the rhythmic foundation without demanding that the spotlight remain on him, and perhaps that is why his final performance feels so poignant. The drummer who spent decades supporting the music from behind the scenes suddenly becomes the center of attention because people realize how much they are about to miss. The reference describes the closing encore as an emotional turning point, with fans feeling the weight of the moment as the reality of the transition settled in. Imagine being in that audience and hearing the final rhythm begin to disappear into the room. For decades, that sound had represented ZZ Top. Then suddenly, the same rhythm carried a different meaning. It was no longer simply part of another concert. It became a reminder that nothing in music lasts forever, not even the lineups that seem permanent. That does not necessarily mean the end of ZZ Top. In fact, the reference points toward a future that could include performances beyond this transition, including a confirmed 2027 schedule. But the future version of the band will exist in the shadow of its history. Every performance will invite comparison. Every new drummer or rhythmic approach will be measured against what Beard created. Every time Gibbons walks onto a stage without him, longtime fans may feel the absence before the first note is even played. That emotional reality cannot be avoided. At the same time, ZZ Top has always been a band built around resilience. Their ability to survive changing musical fashions, generations of performers, technological changes, and shifts in the music industry is one reason their legacy is so powerful. Their future may therefore depend on whether they can honor what came before without becoming trapped by it. The temptation would be to reproduce the old sound as closely as possible, to make every performance feel like a museum piece. But music does not survive by remaining frozen. It survives by being performed, interpreted, and carried forward. That may be the responsibility now facing the people who remain. The reference also raises the possibility of a final studio album featuring Frank Beard's last recorded tracks, something that, if it becomes reality, could provide fans with another connection to the drummer's legacy. Such a project would not simply be another ZZ Top release. It could become a musical time capsule, preserving one final chapter of Beard's contribution and allowing listeners to hear his rhythm within the band one more time. Whether that possibility ultimately becomes reality is uncertain based on the material provided, but the idea itself reveals how much fans value the recordings that capture musicians at the moments before history changes. Because once a lineup changes, the recordings become more than songs. They become documents of an era. Frank Beard's story with ZZ Top is exactly that kind of musical history. He was there through the decades when the band established its identity, expanded its audience, survived changing trends, and became one of the most recognizable names in rock. He witnessed the transformation of the music business and remained part of a sound that never needed to chase every new trend. His drumming helped preserve the blues rock foundation while allowing the band to experiment around it. That balance was one of the reasons ZZ Top remained recognizable even as the world around them changed. Now, as the band moves toward another chapter, the challenge is not simply finding someone capable of playing the drums. The challenge is carrying the emotional weight of everything Frank Beard represented. Can a new rhythmic energy fit inside the old songs without erasing their identity? Can Billy Gibbons continue to lead the band while accepting that the chemistry he knew for decades has permanently changed? Can longtime fans embrace the future while still grieving the version of ZZ Top they knew? Those questions may not have immediate answers. Perhaps they should not. Some transitions need time before people understand what they mean. What is certain is that Frank Beard's final performance, as described in the reference, has become a symbolic moment. It represents the end of one era and the beginning of another. It reminds fans that even legendary bands are made up of individual human beings, and even the most powerful musical partnerships eventually change. The final beat does not erase everything that came before it. If anything, it makes that history more valuable. Frank Beard's contribution will remain inside every recording, every classic groove, every concert memory, and every moment when a ZZ Top song suddenly fills a room and the rhythm feels instantly familiar. The stage may change, the lineup may change, and the future may sound different, but the heartbeat he helped create cannot simply disappear. That is the strange beauty of music. A musician can leave the stage, but the rhythm can continue moving through generations. And perhaps that is the most fitting way to remember Frank Beard's final performance, not simply as the moment when the drums stopped, but as the moment when fans finally understood just how much those drums had meant. ZZ Top may now be entering unfamiliar territory, but the band does not have to choose between honoring Frank Beard and moving forward. It can do both. It can carry his rhythm into the future, preserve the memories of the original brotherhood, and allow the music to evolve without pretending that nothing has changed. Because something has changed. A chapter that lasted more than 50 years has reached a painful turning point, but the legacy remains. And when the lights go down at the next ZZ Top show, when the guitar begins to growl and the crowd recognizes that familiar sound, somewhere inside that music will still be the rhythmic soul of Frank Beard, reminding everyone that some musicians do not truly leave the stage. They become part of the song forever.